What's up, ladies and gentlemen? It's everything you want. It's nothing you need. Told you we'd be back. You never listened to me, but that's okay. Tonight I'm joined with a special guest. Chris, introduce yourself. Tell us who you are and why. I see you got a little logo on that hat there, and why does that logo mean something special to you?
Chris Flynn, and I was the technical director for G4, original G4, from 2006 to when production wrapped at the end of 2012. And my job was to kind of oversee all the technical elements of the show, everything that was coming through. And I had the live switcher, and I would cut the cameras and build the effects, and kind of to handle all that. And it was a great job. It was like family. I loved being part of the show, and out of all the things I had done in 30 years, it was the first thing that, was my niche. Yeah, it
Mm-hmm.
was everything I cared about. And I had done all kinds of things before that. Yeah. And they're great jobs, great companies, just just weren't my thing.
I like how you
And G4
said.
was fun.
I like how you said original G4 because we've been referring to it the past couple of years as old G4, and I realize now we can't. If we just say old G4 in a few years, that doesn't differentiate now. They're
Yeah,
they're both old
because now
G4.
there's two.
There's two old
Well,
G4s.
like I was looking at my Twitter, and my Twitter front row Flynn has in the bio, I always proudly put, G or OG G4 AOTS alumni.
Mm.
Yeah, and that was always on there before new G4 came back. I think that's when I added the OG. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then I ended up clearing it out to make space for the Attack of the Dock, thing. And I realized at some point that, well, now all those people that got laid off, unfortunately, are now also XG4 alumni.
Right.
Yeah.
we're
So
we're all XG4 at this point. Um,
yeah,
but I wanted to bring you on tonight. You actually did a live stream yourself a couple nights ago, so we're now 3 or 4 days out since the announcement that G4 is shutting down again, or I should say has shut down because it was a it was an immediate plug pull. Like it wasn't like, oh, it's going to be down in a month or in a couple weeks. It was like it's done. There's no more. People found out they lost their jobs via social media, via web articles, and I've addressed this a little bit already in a previous video. But it's just crazy how quickly things went south. And I was thinking I wanted to talk tonight, especially with you, because I think you have such a unique perspective on G4, having worked for them in the past. I want to kind of discuss. We all have ideas, right, about what if we were in charge? What if we ran G4? What would we do different? And I'm going to preface this show by saying I don't know any more than any TV executive. Trust me, anyone who knows me will tell you I don't know anything at all. But I do think there were a lot of things I would have done differently. I know if I'd been in charge. And so that's kind of what I wanted to talk about and get kind of your perspective on how things compared from original G4 to old G4 2.0. How do you
I was just in Chris Gore's film threat live stream
Mhm.
chat, and I referred to it as classic G4.
Classic
I
G4? There
thought
you
that's
go.
yeah. I thought
Retro
that's the
G4.
way. Yeah. So it also doesn't point out that we were all old now. That
Right.
people did.
So I know one thing for me specifically with the latest iteration of G4, you would think when you bring back a TV network, you would want to try to take all the good components of the original, leave out the bad, and then just kind of add on to what worked and grow. And it seems like rather than take what was good and grow, they just kind of put everything to the side and just kind of started completely fresh. Would you agree with that? Does that sound about right?
I kind of looked at it a little bit differently. Like when I was doing my interview for Attack of the Dock,
Mm-hmm.
which was summer, I think 2021. At that point, they were doing the beach house stuff,
Right.
and I hadn't really watched much of that.
Right.
And when we discussed it, I just said, that my comparison at that point, the closest thing was Hostess, Twinkies and Hostess cupcakes, and it had gone out of business, and people were devastated.
Right.
They were going for generations. We've loved Hostess Twinkies and cupcakes, and then a company came in and said, we're rescuing it from bankruptcy. We're going to bring back the Twinkies. We're going to bring back the cupcakes. And when they came back, they're tiny. They're
Hmm.
they're not really Twinkies and cupcakes. They're like fun size kind
Uh,
of imitations of it. And I said that was my feeling on New G4 as of like July 21, before they had done the relaunch. Uh, I felt they came back with like a hollowed out version of Attack of the Show. I had advanced knowledge, through inside sources that, 6 weeks ahead of time, what they were doing and what the plan was. And that at that point, I, like most of the fans, everybody in the forums and, the Facebook thread that we had going, everybody thought the same thing. We're going to get Attack of the Show back 5 days a week. We're going to get X Play back. We're going to get Code Monkeys. They were asking for all these different shows, and Blair was like, yeah, that's a great idea. We're going to do that. And what I found out 6 weeks before was they never had any intention of bringing back any of those other shows. And the
hmm.
shows they were bringing back, if you're going to bring back a brand like G4, you're obligated. You have to bring back, certain, franchise elements like Attack the Show and X Play. If they didn't bring those back, nobody would have taken them seriously.
Right.
Uh, it's like if McDonald's went out of business, you bring it back and they go, look, we're bringing back McDonald's, but no Big Macs, no quarter pounders with cheese, no, yeah, we're just kind of going to bring back this other thing. Uh, and it felt like that's what they were doing, when I found out like Attack of the Show was only going to be 1 day a week, and it was
Right.
going to be for 3 hours. And I, talking to my source, said, who now had been rehired by G was back inside.
Hmm.
I said, well, maybe they're going to take all the content that we would have done in 3 days and then, do it in a 3 hour period
Right.
and just be efficient with hiring the crew. You're paying the crew a day rate anyway.
Right.
So have them basically knock out 3 shows. I think a lot of people didn't understand how the cable side of this whole thing was working. They were taking the live shows and they were cutting them down, to air on the linear cable.
Right.
Excuse me. And so I kind of had that image. Okay, well, it's going to be all the content we would have done in 3 hours. And instead, it came back and it was all the content we would have done in like 20 minutes, spread out over 3 hours,
Hmm.
which was painful to watch. Nobody needed a 90-minute around the net. At tops, that was always our A block in the show. And it would usually be 10 to 15 minutes,
Hmm.
on average. And that would include like 5 internet videos and then usually 1 or 2 live studio gags or, pre-tape pieces or something.
Sure.
They were doing in, 90 minutes. I think our longest one may have been 20 or 25 minutes. There was one that we did that was almost half an hour, but it was because they were just extraordinary internet videos that
Yeah.
happened that day, plus our live studio business. Um, and so for something like that, it was an exception, and it was fun still. And they were just dragging it out because I mean, their around the net consisted of just rotating the host from the podium, throwing to the couch for gags,
Right.
and then maybe one bit. And the first like 2 months that I kept popping in to look at it, the only gags that they were doing were like Pizza Hut sponsored stuff where look, here's our Pizza Hut guy again. I was
Hmm.
like, where's all the wacky characters that we used to use in Attack of the Show? And we had a whole variety of them. Sometimes they only popped on one time.
Right.
They
Uh,
just kept bringing the pizza guy back on.
yeah, and this was something you brought up in a recent live stream also was if you look at original G4, you had even on launch back in 2002, you had 10 to 12 unique programs, and each one of those unique programs had unique hosts, right? Every single
Yeah,
show had its own unique character and unique host, whereas with this latest iteration, they kind of just had a pool of talent and they just decided to reuse them and recycle them everywhere. And it was really odd because you had this both on X Play and Attack of the Show, where instead of just Adam and Morgan and Kevin and Olivia, you had Adam and Gerard and Frosk and the Black Hokage, and And then, over on Attack of the Show, you had Kevin and Gina and Gerard and, just all these different hosts. And you're right. They had to cycle through all the hosts just to give them screen time. Because if you had that hour program, there wasn't enough time to give all those hosts proper screen time, I think
Well,
maybe if they had done the 5 nights a week, hour long shows, but then each night was a different host or something like that. But even then, you would have had an inconsistency there, because every night it would have been like a different format almost, because of the different. So I don't know how they would have improved upon that.
Well, pretty typical, television show, and would have been to have 2 dedicated hosts for each show,
Right.
and say, okay, these are our 2 regular hosts for Attack of the Show. These are our 2 regular hosts for X Play. And then everybody else, instead of sitting on the couch twiddling their thumbs, would be a role player on the bench.
Sure.
I think what I talked about in the live stream was, okay, Kasim's field pieces were incredible, right?
Right.
So
absolutely. Yeah.
that's his strength. So we have him several times a week going and filing these field pieces, and covering maybe events, or doing just fun nerd stuff, going to like he did with the Ren Fair and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And have him doing that, and then have some of the others covering things like Fiona had kind of fallen into the feed, was doing that. Okay, well then basically that's when she shows up.
Right.
She shows up and does the feed. And if there's some kind of a sketch that can use her talent, then they'll pull her into it. But for the most part, you're only going to see her when they do the feed. And that's how it would have been with like Allison Hayslip or Layla Cayley. They would have shown up for something special, and been worked into it, and then occasionally guest host, if somebody was out. Obviously Kevin would have been your first go-to for Attack of the Show for host. I would have probably said, since Avalay's, main obligation was to Boosted, that's kind of her identity. So like her and Golden Boy and Frost, their identity is tied to Boosted.
Mm-hmm.
And they may float in on occasion to, do a guest host thing, like Morgan Webb popped in sometimes to guest host on Attack of the Show. That was rare, and it was a big deal when she came in.
Right, but it wasn't the norm. It wasn't the weekly expectation.
Yeah, it wasn't, okay, in the 3rd block, Morgan's going to rotate in every show. And, now the audience has continuity. A show like this, whether it's X-Play or Attack, or, these people are kind of, you become TV friends.
Mm-hmm.
These are TV friends you tune in to see all the time, and do it. And I thought it was just too chaotic, that you had them rotating through. And it's like sometimes I didn't know who is the host of this show, because you would say Kevin Pereira, but then Kevin disappeared before too long. I think the NFT thing kind of soured him on that. And so now who's hosting? Well, he said it was Xavier Woods. Was the next natural choice. To be the host. I was very impressed with him, because he could do everything like Kevin could.
Mm-hmm.
And that was so hard to find in trying to replace Kevin. So, I would say he's the next, but then I found out like he's considered like a permanent guest host role because of his obligations to WWE.
Sure.
And the hard thing I would have said for him was to, have them all stop with the WWE superstar Xavier Woods. And I would have explained it saying it keeps you at a distance. It makes you a permanent guest presence on the show,
mm-hmm.
where you want to be G4 superstar, Xavier Woods.
Right. You can't just show up as Austin Creed. You have to be WWE superstar Xavier Woods.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, I would have lost that, because it just keeps him, too distant from the show. Even though a lot of people would probably argue it didn't bother them, and they thought it was part of the fun.
Yeah.
I would have lost that. I would have, said, in fact, I would have made it a joke that we're not calling you WWE superstar Austin Creed anymore. We're calling you G4 superstar or Attack of the Show superstar Xavier Woods.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, probably him and Gina. You know, I would say, you know, even though I kind of had mixed feelings with Gina. Yeah, that on the one hand, I think there's a lot of things she was great at.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I think if you were going to pick somebody from that pool to be the replacement for Olivia Munn, she would probably be, the.
Yeah.
Although I thought, they kind of split it because I thought that there were certain things that Olivia did that Avile nailed and that were part of her act, and then Gina had other parts, of it. Um, I just got frustrated sometimes because Gina kind of became one note gag. Olivia could basically play off anything that Kevin said,
Hmm.
and Kevin would oftentimes throw her something, very dark or very topical, and Olivia could, it's like a pitch in baseball, and Olivia's like, pop, boom, out of the park, and the two of
Hmm.
them were great at doing that. Candace was not as good at doing that. And, as sweet as she was, just one of the nicest people you ever meet, that innocence and that sweetness and that whole routine of, I'm a sweet Christian virgin, that didn't work on Attack of the Show. Definitely not with Kevin, because
Uh-huh.
now Kevin would throw something blue at her, and it's something that Olivia would have gotten a out of the park home run, and Candace would just kind of give some awkward response about Kevin, I'm a virgin.
Hmm.
So that whole role play back and forth was really important, and a lot of times Kevin would throw something back at Gina, and Gina basically had one note, always one repertoire. That was, joke about her sex life, joke about her body, you
Hmm.
know, and it was always, her responses would be one of those two things. And she would kind of miss the pitch that Kevin threw at her, because she just automatically went there. And I think those jokes worked on her Twitch, because that's what people are tuning in for.
Hmm.
I highly doubted they were turning in to watch her play video games. I think they're watching her, be her
Hmm.
and, throw out these funny, kind of blue, jokes and things. But it was always kind of those same two things every time I watched the show. So, but she would have been the only choice at that point, uh, of the group, to be the co-host. So let's say it ended up, just for argument's sake, Kevin and Gina.
Gina.
And then Kasim is doing the field pieces, Fiona is doing the feed, and then like Will, is doing. They tried to
Entertainment
make
or
Will, yeah, he could cover general entertainment, he
yeah.
could cover some video game stuff, everything. I think I would see him more showing up in the gags. It's hard because like they tried to shoehorn him in to be like the movie guy. And the problem is he had a very unique taste in movies that is a taste that I see all the time here in LA, but it's not a general public kind of thing. He's one
Hmm.
of these people that if it's a movie that's in any way popular or accessible by a general audience, he rejects it and he doesn't like it, even
Hmm.
though everybody else loves it. And he'll pick something very obscure and hard to watch, and uh, and he'll rave about,
Tell you it's the best thing
something
ever.
that,
Yeah.
yeah, something that nobody's going to like. And I've seen him do that a bunch of times, and then they stopped going to him to be the movie guy. Because he was like, I mean, honestly, they should have brought Chris back in at least,
Yeah.
and have him, do it.
They were waiting to
But
see how the
yeah,
documentary was going to turn out.
I can't believe, the resistance to the documentary from within, that I don't know what everybody was so afraid of or who was telling anybody,
Hmm.
things that, that people were afraid to be interviewed, to the point that like people that I'm very close with,
Hmm.
who I would text and email and message and say, hey, Chris needs more interviews for the documentary. Are you interested? They would not only not do it, but they wouldn't respond.
Oh wow.
And I'm like, what is it that these people aren't even answering me to say, no, I can't do it. Sorry. And I don't know if they were afraid of pissing off Comcast or if they were afraid of alienating new G4. I knew a lot of people were hoping to get back in there,
Hmm.
but I don't know what it was. Yeah, so that obviously put Chris at a dis. Yeah, they're afraid to bring him in
That's why
because they're
Chris
like,
never
"What's he
showed
gonna?"
up.
No, but the only thing I'll say to be fair to them was when the documentary first started. as a project, it was in a kind of different direction.
Right.
And like even the poster said, scores will be settled, and it was going to cover, the good, the bad, the ugly,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of the things that didn't work well. And I think in the end, when he changed direction, that was great.
Sure.
It's definitely more nostalgic and positive and good times. When we did my interview, I set a ground rule. I'm like, no griefing. I
Yeah.
said, if I start griefing, you shut me down because I'll start complaining about. And then they fed the E crew really well, and then they wouldn't feed us, and they'd yell at us for taking the E crew's food, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like shut that down. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
not part of the document. No personal grievances, nothing like that. So yeah, that's what I would have said. Everyone has a role to play,
Mm-hmm.
but you've got two regular hosts. Everybody else is a role player. Uh, and I would not have been flying them in and out of the shows together.
Yeah.
Okay, well, one day Golden Boy's on Boosted, and then the next day he's just sitting on the couch for Attack of the Show. And that whole bit with the couch, I mean, there were so many times that they cut back to the couch in hour two. And I'm looking, going, okay, Chasm looks like he's about to fall asleep. Will looks like he's bored or angry.
Yeah.
They clearly just felt underutilized. And that whole thing was a disaster. As soon as I saw that, I'm like, what, these people are just be sitting on a couch?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what I kind of noticed was, going back, if you look at the original G4, you had so many different programs, whereas here you had the amount of you had the same amount, you had the same number of talent. You could have had different unique shows with all of those different hosts, but for whatever reason, they just kind of pulled them all together into a few shows rather than spread them into different categories. What?
Well, yeah.
Yeah. No. Go ahead.
No, I say remember, when we were watching the rollout of this whole thing, and they were making the big talent announcements,
Yeah.
and it became a joke. Like every
Yeah.
day they were teasing, tomorrow's the big announcements for X-Play. But every time it turned out to be like the same five people, and it was all people that they'd been using all summer at the beach house.
Right.
It was like, this is nothing surprising or new.
And I don't think a single one of those
And
people submitted I don't think any of them did a hashtag G4 needs talent post.
no, well,
I think
you
they were
saw
already picked.
yeah, you saw my stream, so
Yeah.
I covered that.
Yeah.
That I when they rolled out Xavier, at the Thanksgiving special, and I heard that because I have no idea who he was. I don't follow wrestling,
Mm-hmm.
and and they said he's WWE superstar, and I was like, oh, okay, so the whole nationwide talent search was just a crock of shit. It was like because there were two guys at the announcement. Now we're learning now that Tucker Roberts, the son of the Comcast CEO, was really kind of where this all started,
Mm-hmm.
coming back. And that name was not out there really publicly involved in G4
Right.
until all the scandal started. At the time when it began, he was dating Olivia Munn,
Right.
and that was the first I was hearing of G4 coming back, and this goes back to 2019, that she was with him, and now all of a sudden there was this idea flourishing of bringing G4 back as an esports channel and as a streaming channel rather than a linear. And our executive producer from Attack of the Show was also our head of production now at Caffeine. He came in the control room, said, I just came back from a meeting with Wilshire Studios, which was
Mm-hmm.
Networks
The old building.
at Universal. Well, it's in Universal Studios
Oh,
now.
okay.
Yeah, we're actually 3 minutes up the road from here.
Oh, okay.
The irony, of all those years I worked for both companies, and then they moved 3 minutes away, and now they don't hire me anymore.
Of course.
So, yeah, you could have banked on that. But he had been at a meeting where they had, been there with the E executives, and they had been saying, there's a movement to bring G4 back as a streaming channel, and they talked about it. And then Olivia in March of 2020 had posted the picture on Twitter of her and Kevin, saying, "Should we bring it back, KP?"
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we got so excited,
Mm-hmm.
because it was like, oh my God, they really are going to bring it back, and so she was involved in it. I personally felt that what she was doing was kind of moving to be the next Chelsea Handler,
Okay.
kind of thing. Which, if you're not familiar with how that all worked, I'll give you the short version of it. Ted Harbert was the president of E,
Okay.
and Chelsea Handler got a show. She began dating Ted Harbert, and I don't remember if he got divorced before or after they started dating. Uh, and he basically made her the queen of E.
Right.
He made sure she was a superstar. He blew up her show. She was guaranteed all this stuff, great contract deals, until they split up, and then he, was gone, and then she kind of ran out her show, and then she left.
Hmm.
So I kind of felt it was one of those, that with Olivia having gotten over 40, and it's harder for actresses to find roles, once you get over that age, especially when you were the hot girl, and you know now I think she was just looking to say, hey, that would be a great backup job for me,
Hmm.
uh, because she had a ridiculous contract with G4 originally, where she was allowed to go off anytime she wanted to do a TV show or a movie, and they did that in good faith because the idea was, generally she's going to go away for a few days or a week or something. But as most people know, the last 2 years of she was abusing the hell out of that contract,
Sure.
including the last 9 months where, she got the mid-season pickup show, and everybody was nervous, like, what's Olivia going to do? Is she going to walk? Because they knew she wanted out.
Hmm.
And it was like, is she going to walk? And she stands there at the podium with Kevin before the show and goes, I am 100% committed to Attack of the Show. And then she repeated it again live in the show, except it was very jokey and it was almost making fun of Kevin, going, come on, would I leave this guy? You know, but she had said, I am 100% committed to Attack of the Show. And then she only showed up 4 more times the rest of the
Right.
time. Yeah. And twice were contractual obligations, that she had to do for Comic-Con.
Right.
So I felt that, she was kind of angling this thing to get this backup job again that she could basically walk away from anytime she wanted. In the meantime, she's still getting paid from G4. But when they broke up, it seemed a lot more dicey that she was going to be coming back. And it seemed like that would kind of be, the end of it. Um, I don't remember how I got started on
Well,
that. I know.
I know one other thing that I definitely wanted to discuss is, um, if you look at original G4's availability, right? So obviously it starts in an era before social media is a huge thing. It starts in the era kind of pre-YouTube. But even then, even though just being a cable network, it was available 24/7, right? You could turn on the channel anytime and there was always something to watch. There was always new content, and if there wasn't new content, there was reruns, right? Okay, pretty simple concept for a cable network. You have modern G4 or previous iteration of G4, and it's only live for a few hours, a few days a week, and that was it. And that was one thing that kind of baffled me was you have a decade's worth of backlog of content of the shows that people do want to see and that people are hungry for. And rather than if it had been me, and again, not a TV executive, I'm not a genius here. G4 could have lasted 3 months under me for all we know. But if it had been me, I would have it would have been live on Twitch 24 hours a day. And maybe 8 hours out of that day was a rerun. So maybe in the morning, you're watching, morning through afternoon, you're watching reruns of the recent shows, right? So if you missed the live show from yesterday, here's the reruns all throughout the afternoon. Then you get to 5, 6 o'clock. Then they go live. That's when they're doing a new episode of X Play, a new episode of Attack the Show, whatever other show they want to do. And then late in the evening, late at night, you've got like a G4 at night block, and that's classic reruns. That's where you're watching your 2004 episodes of Arena and Icons and all these other shows. And rather than do that, it was just we're live 3 or 4 days a week from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. Or well, Attack of the Show ran longer when it was the full 3-hour block, but it was just very odd that in the modern era, G4 almost felt less accessible in a way than it did back then, because it was always a 24/7 thing, and now it sort of just became, well, you have to watch between this hour and this hour, and that kind of confused me. You know.
Yeah, because if you were trying to watch it live, you that's what you would get. Yeah, and then if you were trying to pick it up, on the site on YouTube,
Mm-hmm.
and go through. Initially, they were putting everything together up on that main channel that had the 500,000 subscribers,
Right.
and so you'd have to pick through, and a lot of X-Play video game reviews and things like that, to try to find the show you're looking for.
Right.
So, yeah, I could see that. But on the other hand, when they split it up over several channels, it became harder to follow anything. I was tracking those numbers on Invitation to Party. And
Mm-hmm.
once they split the channels up, Invitation to Party dropped. They were one of the ones that was suspect of view botting, for a while, because they were suddenly getting ridiculous numbers of views, but six people in the chat, kind
Yeah.
of thing. And now all of a sudden, when they split the channels up, Invitation to Party was averaging usually around 400 to 500 views per show.
Mm-hmm.
They had two that went up to like 700 in the last 10 shows. And then the rest were just awful, like 400, views, per show. Yeah. So, yeah, it was harder to find everything and sort it all out, and see what it was versus, just tuning in plus following the schedule. You'd have to keep track of, when things were planned to stream live, and and then remember to tune in for them. I don't think I almost ever remembered to put on, like, at the time they were going to be on.
Mm-hmm.
It was usually I looked it up and they were like half an hour or an hour into the show, and I would just rewind it and start at the beginning. So even though they were still going live, I was back at the beginning. Just do it that way.
And one thing
Yeah.
that was unfortunate was they did have some programming at some point. They had a show, Retribution, and just a few other kind of like an hour or two before X Play went live. They would actually have the hosts come in, and they were just sitting around, hanging out, playing video games, and they would live interact with the chat. And that was kind of a missed opportunity too, I felt, where you're now in a modern era where a big draw to live content is direct communication with the hosts. And in some ways, that they would do like the poll during Around the Net. They would do the live polls, which was simple enough, but there still wasn't that one-to-one interaction. It wasn't a direct interaction with the viewers. So I always felt that was kind of a weird missed opportunity where, again, that could have been something to take up more time. That could have been another program in their catalog of having opportunities to have that one-on-one with, more intimate time with the hosts. And that, I don't know, there was just a lot of
Yeah.
questionable things about the programming for me.
Yeah, it was all thrown together. Let me take 1 second, try to
Mm-hmm.
get some light. I
Hey,
don't
you
know if
are.
this helps.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, it'll work.
Doesn't hurt anything.
Oh, wait. No, I just turned it off.
I
Um,
hear there's a studio down the street full of equipment. You could probably just go in there and grab whatever you need.
well, the thing was that, that studio, what I learned when I had my discussions with the three executives was that the entire building had been wired up for them to be able to live stream basically anywhere in the building,
Mm-hmm.
and do it with no technical crew, nothing. Basically, just plug themselves in and just start live streaming.
Mm-hmm.
And they started doing a little bit of that in the beginning, and then it stopped until they scaled back all the programming.
Mm-hmm.
When they cut everything, now they were kind of thrown back into just doing that. But that was supposed to be a big part of the programming that they were doing. Was that these hosts are going to be constantly live streaming and
Mm-hmm.
doing all kinds of things, just hooking up and playing video games, and sometimes just chatting with the crowd.
And they did do that. They started with that, and then very quickly it just got cut because Golden Boy actually did a live stream a day or two ago, kind of spilling the tea, so to speak, and giving
Oh, yeah.
details of his experience. And I guess there were just complaints about it costs them so much money just to turn on the lights and to do that, which is odd when you consider myself or yourself or anyone else. Anyone can live stream from their bedroom these days, and it doesn't cost anything. So it was just very odd that
Yeah.
it was like they didn't budget for it. They shouldn't have had to budget for it. Is the thing. Like it's a cheap, cost-effective way to get content out, but yet it was something that they cut. It was something that they deemed unnecessary.
Well, they were very scattered, going into the relaunch.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I talked to them, it was 6 weeks before the relaunch, and at that point, they still didn't even know for sure what all the programming was.
Mm-hmm.
They knew the plan was to have Attack of the Show and then the two offshoots of Attack of the Show, and then X Play, Boosted, Invitation to Party, and but they didn't know how that schedule was going to play out.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't know what was going to be on what days or how it was going to work, or so they were still trying to figure all that out 6 weeks before, and it sounded like they were trying to figure all that out as close as like 2 weeks before.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have a crew. They couldn't get any. And so they didn't have any of this stuff figured out, and it was just crazy to be hearing the stories coming from inside. Uh, they were a disorganized mess, according to one of the directors, was one of the original directors at G4,
Mm-hmm.
and he had been brought back in not only to direct, but also to kind of, like he came walking in and they were all like, "Oh, thank God you're here. Now tell us how to do this."
Oh wow.
Yeah. And that included, oh, I remember how I got on the Olivia because we were talking about the basic structure about how it
Yeah.
started, which was Tucker Roberts, who at the time was dating Olivia Munn,
Right.
and then Blair Herter, and then another ex G4 ex Attack of the Show guy who had come from WWE.
Mm-hmm.
And those two, the guy from WWE and Blair, were pretty much the faces of this thing, and were setting it all up and doing it. And oversaw a lot of the hiring, and they were kind of running things until Russell Aarons came in. I don't know how much of it she took over, uh, but you know, you had people there who were supposedly running things and building the company, and
Mm-hmm.
yet when the director walks in, they're all like, "Oh, thank God!" And this wasn't just like PAs or this was executives on the shows. This
Mm-hmm.
was the people who were the showrunners and things saying, "Thank God you're here. How do we do this? We have no idea." And he structured everything. He disciplined it. There was a guy who was supposed to be doing my job, who had it really easy all summer. He had a great time. It was fun because
Yeah.
he's just on this little automation box and he's directing himself and he's just playing along with the gang. And and so when the director came in, this guy introduced himself and said, "Well, I'm going to keep calling the show." And he was talking to one of the best show callers in LA.
Mm-hmm.
One of the best show callers I've ever worked with. Nobody else is anywhere near as clear and concise. If this guy wants to change something on the fly, he'll tell you. He'll do it in a very calm, orderly way. He's just great. But this other clown is telling him, "I'm going to call the show." And again, the director's like, "No, I'm going to call the show." And then he said, "Well, things are really crazy, and I just kind of go with it, so I'm going to keep doing that." And he said, "No, I'm here to get rid of the crazy.
Right.
I'm here to stop all this. I'm going to organize it. It's going to be structured. It's going to be organized. In these shows, we use a script format in the computer called iNews, and there's other versions of it, but I imagine he would have gone with iNews because it's the best. And this is how everybody keeps on the same page as the show changes and moves along. And they'll say, "Okay, item B7, the tape is not ready. We're going to move that to the D block." Well, all the elements tied to B7 are now in that one line in the script, and they all get moved down into the D block.
Mm-hmm.
And so everybody knows the change, everybody's following. Teleprompter automatically follows, the script follows, my effects list would follow. And, you know, this guy wasn't used to that, and he wasn't used to, a director actually telling him what to do. And, to cap it all off, he was going to have to work on not only a real production switcher, live video switcher, he was going to have to work on a top of the line one. It was the one I had recommended for them when we were going into the G4 HD upgrade plan, even though we knew we were probably going to be canceled.
Right.
So we were still kind of working through the plan and doing everything. And when we were gone, the night G4 wrapped at those studios, the engineers literally ripped our stuff out and started converting the room to HD.
Mm-hmm.
Some of us ended up going back there to do like the Will Wheaton project and some e-pilots and things like that. And then eventually, when E News was ready to do their upgrade, they took over that control room for a while. That gear eventually ended up over at Access Hollywood when they were prepping to move to Universal Studios. And then I got a call offering me a job at Access Hollywood where he said, yeah, it's the Grass Valley Cayenne. I was like, yeah, I know. You've got my Cayenne. He said, what are you talking about? I told him the whole story. And I said, that was my Cayenne you have now. So they had bought 3 Cayennes or 2 Cayennes in a shared board for the new G4 studios. And, their plan was to use 2 studios to, do G4 and 1 studio to do outside, vendors, the clients, they would come in and they would do, their show there, had nothing to do with G4.
Yeah.
I heard that never developed, even though they had this state-of-the-art studio, which was silly. But this board, the switcher, is like top of the line, is used on every big show in, in LA. And the guy who was going to be doing my job had never worked on a real switcher before,
Oh, wow.
and had never taken direction, live direction, in a multicam setting,
Mm-hmm.
and was used to just doing whatever the hell he wanted and calling a show. Well, the party was ending, and so he ended up bowing out and saying, "I'm in over my head. This isn't going to work."
Yeah.
But up until then, he was going to be the technical director, who had never actually been a technical director, and their stage manager had never been a stage manager before. And that in that situation, the director had no assistant director. So it's like, you not only don't have assistant director, but you also don't have the support of the person to your right or the person on the stage who's your eyes and ears and voice on the stage.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it was just really, really chaotic. And they were not planned for things. And they had just been doing this kind of free form, off the top of their head, speech house stuff all summer on,
Mm-hmm.
it was very simple, and they were not ready to go into doing, big live shows. And so they just kind of threw these elements together. It's like, okay, well, let's kind of figure out what we can make out of it.
Yeah.
And
I think what was odd too was they didn't necessarily have to do live shows. They chose to. I mean, everything was live, and we are in an era of live streaming and live entertainment, but they could have just as well done strictly filmed, produced shows and then just premiered them at a specific time, at a specific, time, news show at 8 p.m., and then they just play that new recorded show for 30 minutes. But everything had to be live. That was new. And then they would cut for
yeah,
cable.
but they were making it live, but yet they were not doing interactive chat with the audience.
Right.
It's like, then why does the show need to be live?
Why is it live? Yeah.
Yeah, there was no reason for that. And that interactive chat, was crucial to the show.
Mm-hmm.
The viewer army was crucial to the show.
Right.
And, the most I saw from them on the new show was they would allow people to send them gifts, and then they would open the gifts live on the show.
Right.
And that was it. But it was like, okay, let the viewers send in their taped packages and, things like that. They weren't doing any of that. And the whole, like I think we were talking about before, the whole, nationwide talent search, that was a joke.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, as soon as I heard WWE, I said, okay, that other guy, not Blair, but the other guy, they made, some kind of deal that was probably cemented long ago. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then everybody else came from, Twitch and, YouTube, and had established audiences that I'm pretty sure G4 was hoping was going to bring over with them, but they didn't.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I know you had sent in your stuff, and didn't really hear anything, even though you had contacts.
You know my story better than anyone, better than most,
Yeah.
I think.
Because you should have gotten a shot at it.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. But I sent them some other people as well, people that were here in LA who were established, producers, but also were heavily steeped in nerd culture and stuff, if you will, had experience with cosplay and had done like Marvel Studios reporting and stuff like that, who were very highly qualified,
Mm-hmm.
to be in there, and none of them ever heard a thing. And I sent them all directly to Blair. It was like, hey, here's some people, check this out, and here's their tapes, here's their reels, and then I know you were sending your stuff in,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like nobody who was sending anything in the nationwide talent search was getting any feedback or getting a real shot at it.
Yeah.
Instead, they were just going, well, he's got 1.5 million followers, she's got 500,000 followers, and so we'll just bring them in.
Yeah, and I think that was a way for them to skimp on marketing. I think for them they saw it as, instead of spending millions of dollars doing sponsors at live events and sponsors in the gaming community, we'll just hire these really popular people, and those popular people will bring over their people, their fans, and then that and not knocking the talent. I think the talent G4 had was amazing. I think the people that they brought on were incredible. But I think they all suffered from a lack of direction. I think they suffered from poor management, and I think ultimately that's what killed it. Um, but I think their whole plan was, we're just going to bring in the popular people, and the popular people will keep us afloat. And because even just 2 days ago, I saw a post that was, today I learned G4 was on, very nice lighting. Today I learned G4 was on cable. I never knew that G4 was on cable, and I could have watched it on cable because they never
Yeah.
said anything. There were so many shows and events. There's so many things in the gaming community. You have events like Games Done Quick, which is a week-long marathon that's on Twitter. I don't know if you're familiar with Games Done Quick. It's it's a huge charity event. So speed running is a huge thing nowadays in the gaming community, where it's, the goal is how fast can you beat a game, complete a game. They've built a marathon out of that, a week-long marathon for 7 straight days, runs 24 hours, and they raise money for charity. They raise millions of dollars, and they do it twice a year. And it brings in, probably every event brings in 200,000 viewers. And all G4 had to do was show up to that once and say, hey, G4's back. That's right. You can catch us here on these channels. Here's where we're available. Come watch. They didn't do any of that anywhere. It was just, you had to know someone who knew G4 was back in order to know about G4. I feel like yeah.
Remember when the layoffs happened, you were saying, that you were getting feedback from people who were saying they had just learned G4 had relaunched.
Yeah.
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 It's like, well, where, why were they not, getting the word out there? Before I go anything else, can I throw on a couple lights?
Yeah, go for it.
I don't know if you're able to.
Go for it.
Are you going to edit this,
I'll
or
stall.
is it just going to?
I can edit. I can
Because
stall.
I'm starting to look like a hostage video.
That's okay. Yeah, I can see the sun is setting for you there. So in the meantime, while I stall, hey, make sure you go to patreon.com/VGX7. Support this show. Support Ultimate Gaming. I just filmed a new one. I got reviews coming up on Splatoon 3, Mario plus Rabbids, and Overwatch 2. So that's coming up in a little bit. But meanwhile, Chris is turning on all the lights he has in his house. Does he have another one? Let's see. It's like a show.
No, I got something even better.
Oh, there you go. Show and tell.
I got a piece of G4 history.
Yeah, I remember you got this shipped to you, right? Was this in your storage thing in Florida? Or where was this?
Yes, this was part of my storage thing. This was the original effects box for
cool.
Attack of the Show, X-Play, all of our live studio
Did you run
shows.
that?
I did,
You ran
yeah.
that yourself?
And
Okay.
it had an interesting history. If you don't want to hear it, I can skip it.
Go for it.
I'll go on. That box was being released in 1995-ish, 1996-ish.
Okay.
By a company called Abacus that used to make a lot of big production gear. And it was a radically different way of doing digital video effects that was going to change everything, about the way we did it. And I had a connection with Abacus because I was planning to move out here, and my connection had come from LA. And so I was in Orlando at the Golf Channel. And so he was very nice and hooked me up with Abacus out here. And I was out on one of my yearly visits, to kind of start getting ready to move and scoping things out. And so I went to Abacus and they let me play with this box and said,
Mm.
this is going to be our new thing. And it's called the Devious. Um, you know, but it's spelled like DVE is aus, DVE being digital video. So uh, I think it was a year later, we built the last two linear editing rooms at the Golf Channel. This was all pre-Avid, in computer editing,
Mm.
where we had to have all the equipment to be able to edit. And those two rooms, they did radically different, where they bought different edit controllers, different switchers, and the Devious instead of the other older effects boxes. And this scared a lot of people. They were resistant to it. They were like, I don't want to change. I don't want to do anything different. And so it made it easy for me to go in and play in those rooms because nobody else wanted to.
Mm.
So I would go in and do it. And I had had hands on with the box and I had had a manual for about a year. They gave me one when I was there visiting. So I was like, well, then, yeah, that's perfect. So I'm the only guy here with hands on really with this thing. And, so it kind of became a joke. Like Edit 7 was Chris's room, because that's where I would go play. And everybody else was like, I'm sticking with the old.
Mm.
So years go by and I end up out here and I end up at G4 where they had an updated version called the Gvius, but by now the technology in that it was now being built onto switchers, so you didn't really need that as much. When they designed our new rooms for the merger in 2007, where we were going to be moving into E's storage closet,
Mm-hmm.
essentially, that was going to become G4 instead of our Santa Monica studios. They had not factored in bringing the Gvius. They said, no, you don't need it. The manufacturers, the sales guy says, we don't need it. I'm like, yeah, the sales guy doesn't switch live shows. I still need that box. And the TD on the E side agreed because he said for the soup, he was going to need the external effects capability.
Mm-hmm.
So they were very unhappy with us, but they incorporated it into the design, and I got my Gvius. Then, as time's going on, the Gvius on the east side dies. They take mine away because we were the bastard stepchild there,
Of
for
course.
G4, and so we're going to give yours to E. Yeah, and by then I was doing most of what I needed to do on the switcher, so it was okay. He really needed it.
Yeah.
So he had it, and then I go back to Orlando in 2011, I think it was, and they're gutting the last two Golf Channel linear editing rooms, 7 and 8. And one of the editors takes me through there and lets me see the room is all torn apart. Some of the equipment's still there, some of it's not. And I said, well, where's the Gvius or the Devious and the switcher? He said, come with me. He walks me back through the building. In the back, there's one of those construction dumpsters.
Mm-hmm.
And they just threw it all in there. And I said, they couldn't give it to like a school or something. He
Oh,
said, it's
wow.
so outdated, nobody wants it. So I said, well, that's really sad. And I came back to LA, and I don't remember if I mentioned our supervisor, hey, Golf Channel's throwing out a bunch of gear. If you may want to talk to them, or if he just found out on his own. But I forgot about the whole thing. And then all of a sudden, like 6 months later, our boss comes in and it's the E technical director and he comes in for our weekly meeting and he says, oh, and by the way, I now have another control panel and spare parts for you guys, for the Deviouses. And I was like, well, how did you, do? And he said, well, Golf Channel was just throwing them away. So, so this is literally the box that came out of Edit 7 or 8. I forget which one it was. That I started with at Golf Channel,
Mm.
when the thing was brand new, and now it ended up at G4, and
Oh, wow.
ended up in my room. And then on the E side, his died again, so they took mine away, and I said that's fine, because at this point I didn't need it. And they gave it to him, and so in the meantime it died. He stopped using it, and on the last night, wrapped attack of the show. he came over and he said, "I have a surprise for you," and he had it all wrapped up with a bow. And yeah, it's dead. It doesn't work anymore,
That's how I know you're a technical
but
director, because everyone else, they're taking set pieces and props and memorabilia, and you're taking production equipment.
yeah, like that. Well, I tried to take one of the Olivia Munn cardboard, cutouts, but uh, that was in demand. What I did end up getting was the Kevin Pereira cardboard cutout, because Alan, who was the director then, had wanted it, and he had a Porsche, so he didn't have room for it. I had an
Mm-hmm.
SUV, so he asked me to take it and give it to him at a later date. And so I put it in the back seat of my SUV, but it looked like it was sitting, so it looked like Kevin sitting in the back of my car. And I'm going through the drive-through at the Hollywood Chick-fil-A on the way home from the show, and they're just looking in the back seat. What's that guy doing there back here? So I take it home and I put it in my spare room. And for weeks, every time I'd go into the spare room and throw on the light, or I'd see the silhouette and scare the hell out of me. I finally told Alan, man, you gotta get this thing. So I was working then on Let's Ask America with Kevin. It's a game
Mm-hmm.
show. And it was at that studios that is now New G4, ex New G4.
Yeah.
Uh, and Alan said, "Can you bring it in there? I'll come to the studio because I have a plan for it." I said, "Okay." So Alan came in. I gave him the cardboard standee. He took it to Kevin's dressing room
Mm-hmm.
and he put it in Kevin's dressing room with some kind of obscene thing on the genitals or something. And so that when Kevin walked in, he saw it sitting there. And then Alan popped in and said, "Surprise!"
What what
So
what year was Let's Ask America?
this
Do
would
you
have been
remember?
2013.
Okay,
2013.
because I remember I'm sitting in a restaurant one night, and it was probably around 2013 or so, and I was like, I just look up on the TV, and I was like, "Is that Kevin Pereira?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, there he." I had no idea he was hosting that. It was by coincidence I learned that.
Yeah, I think he hosted it for the first two seasons,
Uh huh.
and then I did this. I did fill in, so I did like half of the second season,
Okay,
and then in the third season, someone else took over.
gotcha.
And Kevin was off of it.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
but yeah, so he had done that, and yeah, it was shortly after G4 had wrapped, and I walked in and I just saw him, I was like, "Hey,"
What was
you
interesting too
know,
was I never got when for its original run. I never had G4 in HD. I never had. I could only
really?
get it in standard definition with who did I have? I don't remember what cable provider I had it through. If it was Verizon, maybe, but yeah, I never had it in HD. So it was really interesting. There's a G4 community member, Spooey is what he goes by. He did the archiving for a lot of X Play because they didn't do it themselves.
Oh,
So if you go to his YouTube channel, it's tons, hours and hours of classic G4 episodes, and he has some of them in HD. And it was so weird for me to go back and watch him in HD. I'm like, this looks so much nicer than how I used to get to watch it because I never got it in HD.
yeah. Well, yeah. The thing was, we never actually were producing in HD. We
Mm-hmm.
we were doing like a 16 by 9, you know, stretch,
Mm.
kind of, if you will, or like I forget, it was like cropping, and it was basically still going out SD, and then it would go to eMaster Control, and from eMaster Control it would go out in HD.
Mm.
Uh, so everything up until then was still SD. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, it wasn't like what they were doing at New G4 was full
Full
HD.
blown HD.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, and uh, I had some of the stuff that I gave Chris. It's funny, I can tell my footage in Attack of the Dock because there's a lot of stuff that, obviously came from the archive, stuff that people did recording the shows.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, pixelated, although they did a great job up-resing everything,
Mm-hmm.
for the final, documentary. But then, you could still tell that, things were kind of pixelated and low res, and, kind of washed out, especially the older stuff, that came from the other studio. And then when the footage kicks in and it's like crystal clear HD looking, beautiful, and has no ticker on it, and no ticker and no bug is usually the
Okay.
giveaway. That was the stuff that had gone straight to our digital recording devices, there at the studio. And we would keep this archive of stuff to just pull up to laugh and, have fun or kind of warm up the crowd, kind of get things going.
Mm.
And in the last days before we finished, the John, who was the tape operator, and Heather was the graphics operator, and I, the three of us archived everything. And it was on the 3 DVDs. That was some of the stuff that was sitting, in Orlando for 6 years. That we were trying to, we're like, if we can just get this footage, it'll all be great. And it did work out. But scared me that, like at one point we were going to send you up to Orlando.
Yeah, I remember Chris was like, "Hey,
that.
can you drive up there and get the footage?" And I was like, "I can try." I was like, and then you were like, "Well, if you go by yourself, you probably won't be able to get to what you need because it's buried behind a mountain of other things." And I was like, "Well, okay." And I couldn't find anyone to go with me, so I never got to make the adventure.
No, I was glad, when the stuff came back to LA and I saw how badly beaten up those boxes were. There were boxes that literally fell apart when you started to open them, and some of them were already broken open, and it would have been a nightmare. Yeah, and it would have taken you hours. It took me a week to go through it all and find the hard drives and the DVDs and stuff. So I'm glad everything worked out the way it did. But so that footage is all very high quality. And I laugh because every time the clip pops in that has when they're on the big exercise balls. And the one pops and Kevin hits the floor. When it pops and Kevin hits the floor, you see it and Olivia goes, "Oh shit!" And you can tell that was one that came from the archive. The digital archive we had.
Yeah.
Right, and there's no bug and there's no ticker. There's no, and it was like, that was one of ours. Yeah. But we would have gone HD if we had kept going. But in the room we did. Put the plan together for it. We picked all the equipment. We did everything. And, like they used some very similar equipment, in the studios at New G4, but I was shocked, honestly. I felt like, okay, they're going to come back and they're going to do this thing as cheap as possible. They're going to have an automation system. It's going to be like one person crew, which is what they did all summer at the beach house. And now all of a sudden in my meetings with them, I'm finding out that, we're running 3 studios with state-of-the-art switchers and graphics machines, which means they have to have a whole crew. And I was like, well, there's money here.
Yeah.
And, they must be doing okay with, the startup money. And if they had really known that they were in the situation they were in, they wouldn't have spent all that money, and they would have just used it to keep themselves afloat, give themselves enough time to, have people, find them and, have the shows established and, but it doesn't work like that anymore.
No.
30 years ago, every cable net that was starting up had 2 years of runway. We always kind of said that those were the good times. Because there's money, all over the place. And, they're buying snacks and, high grade coffee for the crew. And, things are great. And they're adding shows and hiring people. And then after those 2 years, it starts to all go downhill because reality starts setting in. But, they don't do that anymore. And now these channels barely last a year.
No, and it's interesting how quickly Comcast turned things around. I don't know if you saw the article that came out today. So, what was it, 3 days ago now? 2 days ago, they pulled the plug on G4, and they already deadline posted today. It was Universal signs new contract. Let me see if I can find it real quick. It was basically something about a show for a bunch of TikTok influencers, and I was like, or I don't know if it was a network, or let me see if I can track it down real quick here. Because someone posted it, they were like, "Wow, that was a quick turnaround." Let's see here. Let's see. It was just today that I.
Are they planning to put it in that studio? Is that?
Let me see.
Or is it just their new startup that they're doing?
I think it was just going to be their new startup. But it was like, seriously, that's the replacement. That's the hot new thing. That's why we couldn't have another 6 months. You couldn't even give us a year.
Oh,
Uh,
and, before new G4, they were doing Quibi, and
all
they
right.
took a bath on Quibi. Yeah.
Yeah, here it is. Universal Studio Group strikes development deals with TikTokers as part of new initiative. Um, has launched a creator accelerator that features 11 social media creators. Signed development deals with Universal Studios Group as part of the original program. Uh, Over the next 12 months, the creators will each have their own NBC Universal content development mentor to help develop both scripted and unscripted content. They will go through a greenlight process that includes helps with pitches, and then they go on to name a bunch of influencers and stuff. And I'm like, you couldn't have given us one more month. You couldn't have made it because that's the big joke now is G4 didn't even last a year. You know, it
Yeah.
didn't even make it a full year, and you know, looking back, you can't really blame the pandemic because it launched after quarantine and all that was over. Although obviously that didn't help. I mean, you saw how long the delay was because I know it was originally meant to launch in 2020, early 2021, wasn't it? Or summer?
It
Wasn't
was
it?
supposed to be summer 21,
Yeah,
and then the studio wasn't ready.
yeah,
That was the delay. Yeah,
yeah.
the studio, they were still building out the studio, and so they pushed it to November, although they still didn't have a definite date,
Mm-hmm.
and like until what, 2 weeks before I think they actually did it. And all of a sudden they said, okay, we've got a date locked down, November 16th.
Well,
But as I was having my meetings with them in early, I think I want to say like the 5th or the 6th of October, and they were still talking about possibly launching before the end of October.
and I know
Yeah.
California and Los Angeles are a very different world compared to down here in Tampa, Florida. But I was. They had originally planned to have my. There you go. You get disappointed every Sunday just like I do. Uh,
Yeah.
but I was originally going to be flown out there to be at the studio, and I don't know if I remember. I don't know if I told you that or not. Back when the launch happened, I was told we're taking because I'm hey surprise I'm one of the G4 former G4 moderators. That was sort of their thank you to us was we were going to get flown out there to be part of the launch
Yeah.
spectacular. And then it was like 24 hours later, it was, oh, no, sorry, COVID protocols, we can't do it. And I was like, oh, okay, thanks. So I never made it out there. I never got to see it in person. I've just heard the stories and seen the pictures.
Well, yeah, like I think we talked about a few times along the way, in a weird way, they did you a favor because,
Uh,
they would have moved you out here,
I'd be
or you would have had to
unemployed
move yourself out
in
here.
Los
Yeah.
Angeles.
And this is a vicious market to be unemployed,
Yeah.
and because everything is so expensive,
Mm-hmm.
that even if they give you some severance, you burn through it quickly,
Yeah. A month later. Yeah.
and, and there's a lot of competition. I think the only at one point when it looked like maybe there was a shot, of you coming back out, I think we were talking about it, and I said, that the only way it could work was if you took the job, came out here and got obviously into the job, and then immediately started like, networking
Yeah.
and started looking for something else just so that you're ready if it goes under.
Yeah.
But to hear if it's true, that, the group that got laid off at the end here when they pulled the plug, didn't even get severance, like the others
Wow.
did, because the rest of them got 6 months of severance.
Oh, wow.
If I remember I think they got 4 to 6 months depending on how long they had worked for Comcast. I forget what we got. I ended up getting like 10 weeks, I
Mm.
think, because even though I had worked for E for a long time, I had been a freelancer. So they based it on the length of your full-time employment,
Mm.
with the company. So that first group that got laid off a couple months ago, they got 4 to 6 months, severance. And, like that RKO Outpost is saying, he said it twice now that, this last group didn't get any severance. And
Yeah.
I know when they were doing you listened to the Wake, I'm sure, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The Twitter Wake, that was funny. Kevin with the soundboard, but they, I think, they were trying to figure out how to get their personal belongings back
Yeah.
because they weren't allowed back in the studio.
I do
Yeah,
know
and they all had things in their office.
I do know at least Gina, she posted today in the G4 Discord, she did get back in today to get her stuff. I don't know how they're spacing that out, or they're like, you got 5 minutes, go. Like if they're making them play supermarket sweep, but
Yeah.
yeah. So it's the whole thing's just unfortunate, right? Because I mean, it's rare enough that a studio comes back once. It's never going to come back again. Like this is it for sure now.
No, I mean part of why they brought it back, as a brand was because,
Esports.
it had, yeah, but it had the brand had value because, it was looked at very fondly. It was looked at as something cool and something innovative, and and there was a lot of love for it,
Right.
and now it's tinged with failure and frost. Yeah, it's like, they're never going to bring it back. I That was what upset me about the whole thing, was just like, I understand you all are going to do whatever you want. You're going to do your new G4 the way you guys want to do new G4, and I respect that. Just don't screw with our legacy. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what they were doing. Because once Frost told the audience to go to hell, now you had people going, maybe old G4 wasn't that great either. And so, like, no, 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 no. Now you're messing with our legacy.
Yeah.
Now you're taking all that love and nostalgia that people had for us, and they were now questioning it.
Yeah.
And or even her tweet. I mean, this is the person who needs to go away from social media, needs to stop talking in public, because she's just one of these people that keeps putting her foot in it. And it's like, just stop. And she had to say, the thing about, our mandate coming back was, to fix the past. And I got really upset about that. I'm like, well, I'm sorry. Wait, hold on a second. Our past needed to be fixed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we lasted 12 years, did over 1,200, 1,300 episodes of Attack at the Show, launched the careers of Olivia Munn and Chris Hardwick. You all, crashed and burned in 11 months, and Frost has said that she's leaving the business.
Yeah.
It's like, how would you say we needed to be fixed?
Yeah.
And I kind of took that personally, and it's, but I still respect them, for trying to do what they could, and they were doing it under really bad circumstances. The
Mm-hmm.
company was disorganized, they were underfunded, and this is where you say, well, like, how would we have done it? And
Right.
the lesson, from 2012 was, you know, we were underfunded, and did not have support programming around us. Granted, we were on a 24-hour schedule, so it was more important. We would have cheaters and cops and hurl and ski patrol and, just a lot of crap,
Mm-hmm.
surrounding our show. Although I have to admit, I loved cops, but I never got tired of
I was
watching
more of a
cops.
campus
And a
PD
lot of
guy.
it, okay, yeah, oh, I got into that too. That was fun. I think cops, it was just because so much of it was filmed in Tampa and Jacksonville.
Yeah.
I was always like, I'm looking for people I know.
Prevents the homesickness.
I, yeah, it's like I know people that have probably been arrested on cops. So, you know, if they had come back and said, we're going to spend the money to have good support programming, a variety of programs, and we're going to have, like, I just found out through the articles and the tweets and everything that they had an art director who was the art department. So they had one guy who was doing all of it. Now, great respect to him,
Mm-hmm.
for doing that. But at the same time, it explained why everything looked so cheap. That, when they would do a gag, it would look like something somebody threw together in the garage, costume that was kind of, just thrown together like some kid's Halloween costume. And most of the gags ended up just involving cheap, food,
Mm-hmm.
gags.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, okay, we're throwing food. I call them food fight gags, where they just throwing food at each other one way or the other, and because it's cheap, because you just clean it up and that's
The
it. It's
the
over.
mega dare with hot sauce.
Right. I mean, well, see, we had a whole art department,
Yeah.
and they were great, and they worked their butts off. And so they would create the set pieces, they would create the costumes and the stunts and all this stuff. When we did the week of UHF,
Mm-hmm.
gags, where we were each day we were doing one bit out of the movie UHF, the
Mm-hmm.
Weird Al movie. And the first day when I came in for Kevin Pereira's clubhouse, when we were going to do the marble and the oatmeal with Sarah and Candace, Kevin was going to throw the marble in the oatmeal, and Candace and Sarah were going to go in and wrestle for it. So it was a little less PG than Weird Al's version
Yeah.
of it. Um, but I was just amazed when I walked in there and said, "Oh my God, this looks like right out of the movie."
Hmm.
Yeah, and I was such a big fan of the movie that I was thrilled. But this was all kind of a personal thing for Kevin because he was a big fan too. And
Sure.
so, we kind of every day would have a big, set piece right out of the movie. And then I finally Weird Al came into the studio for an interview, and I think they reenacted a scene, out of it, to kind of finish it off.
Hmm.
Uh, so, our art department would do all of this crazy stuff for the Thousands show where they put the hay bales all over the place and brought in the greased pig, and everybody underestimated how that gig was going to go because they thought, well, the pig will stay in the hay and Kevin will just grab it. And then the first thing the pig did was go up over the hay bales and then ran through the studio, and people are screaming, and Kevin's trying to catch the pig, and everybody else wants to, it was classic Attack of the Show.
Right.
So our art department was just incredible and would just come up with all this amazing stuff. But it was an entire team of people putting these things together. And New G4 had one guy, just kind of slapping the stuff together.
Yeah.
And you saw it on screen.
Yeah.
So that was one area that they weren't spending more money, they were spending less money.
Yeah.
And it's like that's not what you needed to do. That's not what the AOTS fans were expecting.
Right.
And I saw that disappointment, as I was watching the forums, and the posts and stuff leading into the relaunch. And I had, in the meantime, I was hearing all the inside dirt, and I had my meetings with them, and I said, oh no, because I knew fans weren't going to like it. I used to be on the forums throughout the live shows, because, kind of before social media, really, it was the G4 forums, and you go in and you get all this, viewer feedback, and you knew what people liked and didn't like, and when they were upset or when they were really happy. And, and I'd go in and kind of chat, under a pseudonym, and the only thing is sometimes when they would start griping about stuff and, that they just didn't understand how TV works. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would, act like, well, I don't work on the show, but I do television. So I can, like the Halo 3 trailer, debacle.
Gotta cut.
Oh my God, they were screaming for the director's head on that.
Yeah.
And I had to kind of go into the forums and say, well, based on my experience, that's not a director's call, that would typically come from like an executive
above,
something, because that's what had happened.
Right.
And it was like, and I just I couldn't out at myself or everybody else, but I tried to clarify it because it was the director from E! News who was filling in, because our director was out on site at, I think, the Sony presser or Ubisoft presser. And this guy, was filling in and had no idea what he had walked into, when suddenly the executive is screaming at Adam, and, he's telling him, we're going to commercial, and Adam's going, we're not going to commercial. And go back and forth. And then the executive, starts seeing it as a challenge to his authority and starts screaming, don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me what to do. And we're all like, oh my God, what's happening?
Yeah.
And, so, it was just,
Yeah, I think my tweet pretty much sums up my feelings that I put out the other day, and I said, the thing that hurts the most about this relaunch failing is you saw the pool of talent. You saw the talent, passionate people who wanted to make something great, who loved G4 for what it used to be, and just, again, it was the exact same thing. Poor management, poor executive decisions that ultimately just led to its failure. And, Golden Boy talks about that too. He goes, it's really not on one person. It's not on one incident even. It's a combination of things from various places that ultimately crushed it.
Yeah, no, I have really harsh feelings toward what she did because I just felt it was incredibly stupid. And, and I felt that it did accelerate everything. And I felt that the fact that she kept, putting logs on that fire, at that point, you're messing with people's careers. You're messing with people's jobs. And employment stuff. And I did, like I said, she was messing with our legacy as well, but all she did was accelerate it. I mean, I knew it wasn't going to work because those numbers were so bad to start with, and they just kept getting worse week to week. Like they were cutting in half every week. And then I stopped just watching. I stopped tracking the numbers. I was like, oh, this thing's going to fail. I'm just, and I can't watch it because it's so bad.
Mm-hmm.
And I stopped keeping track of it until I think it was Chris who said, but you hear about the whole G4 thing. I was like, no. And he directed me to all the YouTube hate,
Yeah.
and I was like, oh my God, what is going on? And yeah, at that point it was like, yep, it's going to fail.
Yeah.
But apparently they knew it was going to fail too, inside, the management.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I was told the day she put up that meme that said, I survived, let's play games, I was getting chat that night saying, I learned something very interesting from a source. And he said that I was told that the reason they've kept her on is to throw her under the bus when this thing fails, because they know it's going to fail.
Mm-hmm.
They know it's inevitable. And rather than them take the blame, for bad decision making, bad business plan, not researching the new media landscape. I mean, just, through watching a couple of weeks of these YouTube videos, skewering G4, I learned how this whole YouTube landscape works. And it was like, why didn't they do that? I wasn't supposed to do that. I just thought it sounded good when they said our plan is we're not going to rely just on linear cable. We're also going to diversify with, Twitch and YouTube. And I said, well, that sounds like a smart plan. And, that sounds great. And I'm assuming there's money behind it. And things are good. None of them bothered to look at this thing and go, we don't stand a chance.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because there are so many YouTubers doing what we're doing.
Right.
That we're not going to get their attention, and, we can't spend the money. But, it was all a dishonest premise to begin with. It was all, we're going to get them to watch on the esports channel. And, by just throwing in something that's called Attack of the Show, something that's called, and that's on the executive level.
Right.
I know in the trenches, like the talent and the producers, and they all believed in what they were doing.
Exactly.
And there were a lot of people with that
Right.
sentiment that, I was a kid watching Attack of the Show, and it was my dream to be part of G4. And this is my dream. And, we had 12 years. I was part of it for 7. And, it was heartbreaking for us,
Mm-hmm.
to do it. But we all felt like we were just the victim of the corporate nonsense, there. I found out through the documentary that, we were actually profitable. I didn't know that. I always thought we were a loss.
Mm.
And I found out we were actually profitable. Everything was there, except the woman who was in charge of the entire entertainment group, through E. She just didn't like G4. She just didn't get it.
Didn't see the value.
She was embarrassed of it. Yeah. And it was like, so, she wanted to pull the plug. And the guy who was put in charge of G4, he was notorious for going through all the NBC Universal companies, as a kind of network killer, that he would come in and kill off any kind of live studio production, because his theory was, if we can get rid of these shows and then just bring in acquired programming, that programming is the responsibility, and the employees of the programming are the responsibility of the outside production company. So if the ratings start to dip, we can kill that show off, and we don't have to worry about severance or anything. It's not our problem. It's the production company's problem.
Right.
And he had done it to USA Network and Sci-Fi, and and he was going through all the channels one by one. And Alan, our director at the time, as soon as this guy took over, he said, "We're done," because he said this guy is known for just going through and killing off live studio programming.
Wow.
And getting rid of them, employees. So, we weren't surprised, but we felt that, it was a reflection of that and not of the work we did. And granted, our work was a little spotty the last like 9 months after Kevin had left. Like the chemistry with Candace didn't work, although she put her heart into it. She really did. And so did Sarah. Sarah was amazing because like she didn't do well in the auditions at all. when she was auditioning to be the new co-host, and she didn't do well, and she was just kind of there because she was an ex-playmate, and
Mm.
she had dated Chris Hardwick for a while, and I think she was dating Ryan Seacrest. Yeah, and it was like, so okay, she's just getting a shot at the audition, and she didn't do well. But they said, well, she's really cute. We can keep her for the feed. Yeah. And once she got into that role, she
Uh,
just like blew up,
mm-hmm.
and to the point that like after a while, people were going, well, gee, why didn't we hire her instead of Candace? But even then, her and Candace played off each other really
Mm-hmm.
well. That was, but the whole show was nosediving into like, misogyny. It really, it really was. It was
Yeah.
going into like dumbed down, testosterone humor. Yeah, and
Kind of like there's one bit, I don't know if you remember I think the clip's still on YouTube, where they're going through a Christmas buyer's guide, and they've got like the stylus that kind of like what you use in like football. You know exactly what I'm
the
talking about.
telestrator.
Tell straight. You know exactly what I'm talking about already. And they were just seeing how many times they could draw dicks. Like they were like, you could buy
Yep.
this, you could buy this, and you could buy this, and that was the whole bit for like 10 minutes. And I was like, and I remember I watched that with my friend once, and I was like, you could tell this was when they knew they were dying. Uh,
Oh yeah. Well, we had the notice because like it was the end of October that we were told 2 months and that's
yeah,
it.
yeah,
And it's going to be done. And they knew they were taking a gamble, by telling us that, giving us 2 months heads up. And I think they were just hoping that, okay, hopefully they respect us enough for giving them the notice, that they don't just go total anarchy on us and everything. And, some people did leave and jump ship. My bosses asked where I was at. And I said, I'm going down with the ship. I'm
yeah.
here until we're done, and then I'll start looking for a new job. And at the time, I had planned on, starting my own company anyway, when it was finished. So there was no rush. It was like,
Yeah,
and I wanted to be there to the end. It was more than just a job.
sure.
It was family, and it was a big part of my life. So I'm like, I'm going to stay on the ship to the end. And but things did start getting kind of crazy because there was a sense of like, what are they going to do? Fire us? Yeah. And that was the Thanksgiving gadget, or no, not gadget prawn. What was? Yeah, yeah, that was the
Was it
Thanksgiving
Gadget
gadget
Prawn?
prawn
Yeah.
for Black Friday,
Black
for the
Friday.
Black
That's what it
Friday
was. It was the
sales.
Black Friday one. Yep.
Yeah, and it was John Barrowman from Doctor Who and Torchwood and
Yes.
Matt
Matt
Myra.
Mara. Yep.
And Matt Meyer had the telestrator, and they used to play around a lot off camera,
Mm-hmm.
with the telestrator, and I would help them, kind of enhance things and do stuff. And but now Matt was doing it on air, and
Yeah.
I loved it because he was going, well, you see, with this PS3, you get some extra controllers, and you get a new cartridge, and then you get the Xbox. Yeah. And then toward the end, he was even like drawing stuff coming out of
Uh
them,
huh.
and
Uh huh.
I was in tears. I think the last Thanksgiving I didn't post it because of things that were going on, but usually I post that every Thanksgiving, and I
Uh-huh.
said that was one of the funniest moments. Those last like 6 weeks were some of the funniest stuff we ever did,
Yeah.
because then there was the Andre Miller, the Eric Andre stuff,
Eric Andre. Yep.
and he dropped his pants, and that was funny, and he had the underwear, but then he took the underwear off, and he tucked his junk in, yeah. And the thing was, Keith, who was our legal guy, he hit the button that blurred the entire
Uh
screen,
huh.
and then I scrambled to make an effect that just covered up that part of his body, because I knew they were blurring the whole screen,
Uh huh.
so as soon as my effect was ready to go, we lost the blur. And then I was literally motion tracking him with the joystick
You're
on the
just sitting
switcher.
there trying to.
Yeah, as he moved, I was trying to follow him, and this is kind of a mess now.
No,
But
you're good. You're fine.
uh, and so we did the whole thing, and I had gotten the picture that Mike Costa had taken, of Eric with his junk tucked and Candace going. So, that was funny. And then the next day, because what happened was at that point, Mike Costa was kind of finishing out the show, as the host. And he had come from Michigan, where he had been friends with Eric Andre and TJ Miller and a bunch of other comedians.
Mm-hmm.
And the next day was TJ Miller came in, and it was Christmas. So we had the monitor with the fire going in the background. We had the Christmas tree up and the whole thing. And TJ Miller was hysterical because he comes in going, well, I just thought I was coming in for an interview, and now there's these expectations that I drop my pants. And then there was the nervousness of, is he actually going to do it? Yeah. And he would keep, like in the middle of the questioning, he would start standing up and undoing his pants, and everybody's like, oh, and they would chant. And and so it went back and forth and back and forth. And then finally he did it, and he dropped his pants, but he didn't lose his underwear like Eric Andre did.
Yeah.
And he was standing there, and everybody's laughing and going, okay, this is funny, And then he stops, and he walks over to the Christmas tree, and he turns his neck, and he's looking back at Mike Costa, and he goes, and now here I am on your show where you can't even afford real fire. And he said, where I'm forced to debase the secular image of Christmas. And then he dropped his underwear, and he jumped on the Christmas tree, knocked it over, and starts humping it.
Oh, fun.
And at this time, Candace was like, less screaming and going on. She goes over and starts immediately calmly taking pictures and, and I had a blur ready to go. So this time Keith, popped the blur up for a second, and then I had the blur over his ass. And then the whole time, every time he's pumping his ass up and down, like I had to follow him with the joystick. And the next day the memo came down, and I was already saying, look, this has been really funny, but it was a girl who used to come on the show all the time, science, a wizard, and and she was great. She was always a great guest. And Cara Santa Maria, but she was also very cute. And I was like, we've had a couple of days of the comedians dropping their pants. If somebody's going to drop their pants, maybe Cara Santa Maria could do it. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of joking around, but then the memo came down from upstairs. If anybody else drops their pants, we're pulling the plug now. Oh, there's no wrap party. There's no final episode. There's no nothing. You're done.
Yeah.
So we kind of reined it in a little bit from there on out. But, like I had told, Ryan over there at RK Outpost, and I said, they treated us to a day at Universal Studios, where we all took a day off and all got to go together, and we just carte blanche. We could ride all the rides. They paid for everything. And at the end, they took us to one of the nice restaurants at City Walk and paid for dinner. And, we could get whatever we want. And, the production manager was quietly going around going, it's all paid for. So order whatever you want. People are ordering like 5 dinners to go.
Yeah.
We're all going to be unemployed. We may as well.
Yeah, why not?
And the funniest part was that they were just harassing the tourists. As we're going, I thought, oh my God, we're all going to, because we were all on one tram.
Right.
And I thought we're going to get thrown out of the park, because they were just yelling vile shit at the tourists and everything.
God.
So we had all that. We had a big rap party, and then we went to a bar nearby, the night of, and they paid for everything. And, we had done like a month's worth of best of episodes. We had that beautiful finale show, and, we got to go out with a lot of dignity, and these guys, they find out on Twitter, we're hearing that they didn't get their severance. They had trouble getting their stuff out of the studio, I guess until today.
Yeah.
And they've gone out with just, it's really hard because they've taken such a beating all along from YouTube and online, and, people hating on the show, hating on them, and, that they have to go out with that.
Right.
You kind of hope when you're in that position that we're going to last long enough to prove these people wrong.
And on a high note.
And
yeah,
but that didn't happen. So you're going out on this failure.
Yeah.
As Bucks fans, we understand how that works, but
we experience that weekly. We know exactly how that works.
That's every time.
You go in with high expectations and you leave very disappointed.
Yeah.
That's not what we
sometimes
expected.
decades at a time.
Yes.
Yeah. But so they have to live with that. There's nothing they can do to go back and change the fact that, their G4 didn't even last a year.
Right.
And was a failure. And that's not a reflection on them.
Right.
And it's not even a reflection totally on Frost, but they have to live with it.
Right.
And they'll, go out kind of knowing that there's a contingent that, thinks they're the group that killed G4.
Yeah.
Ruined the brand. And, it's, it's a hard thing to live with, but they'll all be fine. They'll move
Oh
on,
yeah.
and they'll do projects
And
together.
there's already, yeah, some of the hosts they're already getting together. They're forming small groups and teams and Patreons, and there's already plans in motion. Kevin actually now owns the G4 Discord already.
Okay.
So we know that's safe. It's not going anywhere. I own the subreddit, so the subreddit's safe. It'll just become another museum slash graveyard of remember this funny old
Well,
clip? But
yeah, but even like people were asking online, what's going to happen to all of the new G4 production that's on YouTube? Was it going to
yeah,
get taken
and,
down?
and
Is
we
the
don't
channel
know.
just going to sit there?
We don't know. So it's one of those things where there's people are already scrambling to download all the content they can for archiving and sharing and such, because a lot of that is especially before the relaunch, a lot of that was hard to find. There was a lot of episodes out there that just aren't online, and some of that could be lost media for all we know now. You
Yeah.
may know more than I do about if there's lost media, G4 lost media out there. But
Well, I
I'm
think
sure there
somebody
is
has the stuff.
in a
It just
vault at
becomes a question of,
Comcast.
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, it just comes down to like who, like if the one person who has access to that material is not going to cooperate and letting it go out in the public, then is anybody ever going to see it?
Right.
And I mean, Chris ran into some issues with trying to get cooperation with footage, and I think that's why they ended up doing a lot of torrent, kind of stuff. And
I had to help him. I had to
I
gather a
knew,
lot of footage from.
well, I was glad he was able to find it all,
Yeah.
because he found a lot of great stuff, plus the stuff I gave him, and I think some other people gave him some things. I had all the best of episodes on DVD, so I gave him all those, and that gave a ton of footage,
Mm-hmm.
to work with. And uh, but there was some drama behind the scenes that, there were certain parties who had control of some of that footage that, were not going to cooperate with the documentary. And, it was just all silly.
Yeah.
Maybe someday I can tell those stories, but
Someday. Not
right
today.
now it's like I don't worry about myself. I just don't want anything blown back on the documentary or
Yeah.
Chris. It's like
Yeah.
uh,
Absolutely.
so
But
I do try to kind of watch my tongue,
yeah,
a little bit. Yeah.
and I think that's probably a good point to wrap up on. The documentary had its premiere at Tucson Film Festival. If I had realized that was going to be a big event, I would have tried to be there. I didn't realize it was going to be that big of a premiere. Um, but I know it's coming out soon on Blu-ray, and it's going to be kind of going on a little bit of a tour in that area.
Yeah, I think he's trying to put it in a few festivals first. This was kind of a yeah, like the first big test screening of the finished movie,
Yeah, yeah,
geared to students at the University of Arizona, through the film festival.
right.
And we just lucked out because with the rain that happened, uh, they moved it to this venue, this rooftop venue, where they were also having the wrap party for the whole film festival.
Oh,
So after Chris's screening, everybody got to stay around and then just kind of be part of the wrap party.
gotcha.
Yeah, that was coming. And if you've seen Napoleon Dynamite,
Mm-hmm.
Ephraim Ramirez, who played Pedro,
I did see that on Facebook.
he's
Yeah,
he's the DJ, and he was awesome. He was like, apparently this is something he's really into. And
nice.
yeah, I was filming a bunch of it just because it was cool watching him do it and listening to it.
Yeah,
But it was a great screening. Yeah, it was just nice, especially because there were like a core of group, there that were fans of G4, and they loved it, and
mm-hmm.
they loved seeing all the footage again and hearing the stories. And but then there were also people, and I was more interested in the people who had not watched G4, because I'd always been curious about how does this play with someone who hasn't seen it.
Sure.
Does it make them curious to want to go back, and watch the old episodes? And the people that I talked to, it did. So,
Definitely.
I think that's a great thing, because Chris was a little nervous about how does this play to somebody who isn't like, heart into G4. And so when he got that reaction, he was really happy,
Yeah.
because you can see that it plays as a film, regardless of whether you like G4 or not. It's
Right.
it's just an interesting story.
Yeah.
It's fun, and there's a lot of great, stuff. We also talked about the fact that the shift from, pre-COVID, odds are it would have been a lot of talent, and pre G4 coming back.
Hmm.
It would have been a lot of the hosts if they had been willing to sit down and do the interviews and everything. And this was different because, when none of those people would really cooperate, it ended up shifting to more of behind the scenes people who were
Hmm.
willing to talk. And he got some great interviews, and I found that more interesting because, like when we talked about at the screening, if it had been mostly talent hosts and stuff, I said all those stories are already out there, that they already are on best of episodes and interviews and things. And it would have been the usual shit. It would have been, oh yeah, he was so great. I loved working with him. He was so funny.
It was
And
the best of
you weren't,
times.
yeah, it
Yeah.
was like it was a great thing. And to be able to hear more of those nuts and bolts stories of in the trenches, the stuff that
Mm.
went on behind the scenes, and how some of these classic skits and things came together, I found it way more interesting,
And you tell
to
some of
do
those
it that way.
stories. You're
I,
featured
I had,
kind of heavily in the doc, so.
it's funny. I honestly thought that when this thing's done, maybe will have left in one or two of my lines,
Uh
and watching this thing and again, he's using my lines. I was shocked that like when it gets to the third act, where we have to start explaining, the kind of downfall of G4, that really all the heavy lifting came down to the executive vice president, from everything,
mm.
and me.
Yeah.
And I was the guy, pushing the buttons in the thing who we at one point literally had a chimpanzee come into the control room and do my job. We put him at the switcher and he put the headset on him and he just kept pushing the buttons. And he realized when he pushed the button, it lit up. So he loved it. And he just kept pushing the buttons. In the meantime, the trainer is sitting next to the director and the AD and the technical director who was working that day because I was out. And he's telling all of them, don't look at him. Don't make eye contact. If you make eye contact, he'll rip your face off.
Oh my god.
And I had begged them to do this, to bring him
Yeah.
in the control room. And I thought, oh, I'm sorry, guys. I didn't realize I put your lives in danger.
Oh, fun.
But so now I get to say that a chimp literally did my job,
Yes.
push the buttons. But it was just funny to see, that so much of it, came from
Yeah.
me. But another, guy that, was XG4, we know that he got to screen it. And yeah, he messaged me and he was like, dude, you didn't hold back, And I was like, I'm the one person who has nothing to lose. I'm basically retired.
Yeah.
So, I don't have anything to lose in this. I know everybody else has to be more careful and more diplomatic. The only thing I've wanted to watch out for is I don't want any negative stuff to blow back on the documentary.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I'm going to say, the truth of what went on behind the scenes, and good, bad, and ugly, and because that's what the fans want to know.
Yeah.
I mean, they want to know how it really worked and what they were watching. So, but when it was all over, that first test screening, that I was watching through Vimeo,
Mm.
I had it feeding into my TV. I think I was watching it at 4 a.m, and it got done, and the credits started to come up. Yeah, and I don't. Have you seen Dog Day Afternoon?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so when the pizza guy shows up, right,
Okay.
and he's
Yeah.
got all the pizzas, and he gives Al Pacino the pizzas, and he's surrounded by all the police and the media, and he's eating it up, and he's looking at the cameras like, and everybody else is like, oh my God, are they going to kill him? Are they going to take him hostage? And the guy's like, he couldn't be happier. He's like,
Hmm.
and then he helps Pacino bring the pizzas into the bank, and then when the door closes, he looks at all the cameras and he goes, I'm a pizza, and then he kind of runs away.
Uh-huh.
And it was 4 a.m. I had my headphones on, and the credits came up, and my credit came up on the thing, and I just yelled in my living room, "I'm a big star!" I
That's
was
how I
just
felt when I
laughing
saw my
forever.
name. Yeah.
Well, it was cool that he not only gave you your producer credit on it,
Yeah.
but that he also acknowledged to the super fan that kept us honest
Yeah.
because you kind of kept the whole thing alive. I mean, we had it alive privately,
Yeah.
in our groups, for ex people that work there, and every time there was some major viral video hit or something, we'd all end up in a post together, all going ATN, ATN,
Hmm.
ATN, because it would have been our number one video.
Yeah.
And or if it was real nerd movie trailer or something that would have been part of the show. We
Yeah.
all would get together and kind of comment, and so it lived on for us. But you were keeping the community alive,
Yeah.
which I had no idea was still going on. And
It was hanging on by a thread at that point, but yeah. But
well, then you had to hand it all off to new G4, and
uh, yeah, we know how
so
that went. And here we are. So
that's life,
that's life.
They still, I feel happy for the ones that get to say, it was my dream to do it, and I
Yeah.
got to do it. And
Yeah.
I totally identify with that because, for me, I was in college, and my favorite show was Talk Soup, which was the predecessor to The Soup.
Yeah.
It was like Greg Kinnear, John Henson, Hal Sparks, Aisha Tyler, and were the hosts. And it was one of the shows that put E on the map. And I loved that show. I came home every day, rushed home from my classes. I watched E! News with Steve Kameko and Jules Asner, and then I watched Talk Soup, and then I watched Coming Attractions, which was their trailers show, just all movie trailers with Todd Newton. And that was it. And then I watched all the red carpet coverage and everything else. And I dreamt of working on that show, and I was starting my television career. And I was always sending them resumes, and sometimes I'd hear back with a generic letter. Sometimes I heard nothing back. And I moved out here in 1999, and then within 6 weeks I was working there. And I was shocked because we're walking up and down the hallways, and they're introducing me to everybody. And I felt these people were all actors on the show. I never realized that they were the actual crew. So Tom actually was the stage manager. Alan was the assistant director. Fred was the director. Charles was the camera guy. It was I got to live that dream for a couple of years, working on the last few years of that show and E! News. And I still have a relationship with E! Although by the time I'm done with all my G4 press stuff, I probably won't. But I got to, to live that dream, and, something more than just a job, something that's really important to you. And these folks all got to do it. I do put a little asterisk and, try to remind, them that, when they say their dream was to work on that show, that they came home and watched every day. And I mean, that show's dead. That show's gone.
Yeah.
That was our show, and that's the difference. My dream was to work on E! News and Talk Soup, and I actually got to work on E! News and Talk Soup as they were. What they ended up working on was not really, Attack of the Show and X Play. It was their version of it. And to be made how they were, but to still get to be part of all that craziness and, get to, work with Kevin and it was, Kevin's just one of those rare guys that just has a great impact on everybody around.
Right.
And whether you worked with him for 7 years or you worked with him for, 10 months or, he makes an impact, because, he's really special. And a lot of them have said they learned just so much from working with him, which is really good. And for X Play, they worshipped Adam,
Right.
So, they got to work with him and, that and all, but they still got to do it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, real quick, where can people find you on social media, on the internet? I know you've got a few different places you hang out online.
Yeah, my Twitter and Instagram are both Front Row Flynn, and I have a Facebook page set up for Front Row Flynn, and then my YouTube channel is Front Row Flynn.
Consistency, that's good.
Yeah, I when I checked all the brandings, I was like, okay, because I decided I was going to rebrand everything. Because the channel was set up to be movie Q&As.
Right.
Yeah, because I have this great skill of being able to get into all these different screenings and premieres and stuff that I sit in the front row, and then I kind of document Q&As. I document the festivals, premieres, and stuff. And that's mainly what my channel's been about. Now I'm adding a little bit of live streaming, with the G4 stuff. Just because people are curious about what happened.
Yeah.
There's a lot of truth that's kind of been buried. Yeah. I think back when the layoffs happened, that's when I kind of started saying to Chris, this the live streaming seems to be really popular every time there's some major G4 story, and now we know the end is coming. So, do we want to put something together? I was thinking like a round table, just like what we're doing, but more, just of the people that were involved, popping in and out,
Yeah.
just telling the story, both through, quick synopsis of the old G4 and then what happened with new G4.
Yeah.
But, he's very careful about saying he wants to keep a distance from, this whole thing because, Attack of the Dock is not about, new G4s. They have their own story to tell. And, but it's going to make a great documentary.
It will.
There's so much intrigue that's coming out now that, I think either tonight or tomorrow I'm going to, live stream about where's the money. Because now all these stories are coming out and there was so much emphasis on Frost and Adam and Blair. Okay, where the hell did all the money go? Because they obviously had startup money and they should have been able to last a while. So why didn't that work? It sounds like there's been at least a little bit of grifting going on there.
Sure.
I think we'll find out more as it goes along.
Yeah.
But
well, Chris, thanks for chatting with me for this long. I didn't think we were going to go this long, but I'm glad we did. But
I'll just see.
I was like, he'll get bored talking after 30 minutes. It'll be okay. This was fun. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And a lot of this information you go over is a lot of it's more in detail on Attack of the Dock, and then of course on your own channel, Front Row Flynn. You've had some discussions already about these topics, and I'm sure you'll have some more things to say in the next coming weeks. So
yeah, I just it's a combination of having so many stories to tell, from that time, and watching what happened with New G4 and getting all the inside dirt, but then also, being quarantined and isolated. For the better part of the last 3 years. So, it's like I get talking, it's like, hey, that's another minute I don't have to go sit on my recliner and do Microsoft Flight Simulator. So,
there you go.
I'll sit and keep talking. Tucson was amazing because I was actually traveling. I was out of the apartment. The only issue was I have to keep wearing double masks and gloves and nobody else there. And I was afraid it was embarrassing Chris because I'm everybody's kind of looking at me like, who's the freak with the mask and the gloves?
What's wrong with him? Yeah.
Chris is like, he's with us,
Yeah. Well,
but,
just thanks for coming on. I had a lot of fun. And we'll do this again sometime.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, then we'll have to figure it. Chris was just saying again today they're going to try to do an LA Comic-Con screening and a panel, some kind. And as of Saturday, he was locking in a date for the premiere.
Okay.
So
cool.
Hopefully we'll see you out here for one of those.
So yeah, I'll definitely try to be out there for that. And of course, if you're a fan of Attack of the Dock, keep your eyes peeled because we'll have some more news for that in the coming weeks.
Yeah. In some ways, the timing was. It could be a big boost for the documentary.
It could be. So, all right. Thanks again, Chris. Appreciate it.
Oh, take care, Hunter.
All righty. See ya.